So hello, everyone. We are here for our fifth episode of The Looking Glass. This is the banner prepared for today's episode. We have the great honor to have, uh, stop sharing, the great honor to have here with us Julie Smith, who is, first of all, a great friend, and she is on the faculty of the School of Communications at Webster's St. Louis campus. She is the author of Master the Media, How Teaching Media Literacy Can Save Our Plugged-in World, and specializes in ways to debunk information found on social media channels, and challenges, maybe we can say. So today, we have Julie to help us understanding a bit more the role of social media related to the misinformation on COVID-19. But then, since the thing is, I don't want to say past because it's not past, but here in Europe seems to be less urgent than before. We also started thinking, well, this can be applied to other things happening right now in the globe, started from the United States and of course expanded in other places. So we actually decided to expand the conversation to other aspects. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm very eager to listen to my friend and colleague, Julie Smith. Applause because everybody's muted, but just imaginary applause.
But I am so happy to see familiar faces, and thank you so much for asking me to do this, because you know that this is my favorite thing to talk about in the whole wide world. And I haven't been in the classroom since February, and so I might just explode all over the screen because I'm so excited to be talking about this stuff again. So I'm going to share my screen and kind of show you obviously, I'm going to talk about COVID-19, but I'm also, because of everything that's happening in the United States, I also want to share the resources that I use regardless of what the breaking news story is of the day. So obviously, I teach at Webster in St. Louis, and I've been doing it since 1997 at various levels. And I've been at Webster since 2001. I was adjunct for 16 years. And I think this is going to be either my third or fourth year as a full-timer in St. Louis. And I'm so relieved we found out on Tuesday that we're going to be going back face to face. There's going to be some adjustments that we have to make, but at least I'll get to see my students in August, because as you all know, last semester was quite an interesting experiment. So misinformation has been around forever, right? So these are some famous cases here in the United States about a bat boy that was found in West Virginia. This picture of Elvis.
Let me stop you because I don't think we are seeing, I see a gray screen right now.
Oh.
So it happens also to my students sometimes, so probably.
How about now? What are you seeing now?
We may have to stop sharing, and then when you reshare, choose the other browser. I've had to do that a couple of times.
Okay, tell me what to do.
What
are you seeing right now?
Move your mouse up to the top, you stop sharing, and then do the process again and choose the correct browser for what you want to share.
Okay, so yeah, now we see your presentation.
Okay. Great. And do you still see it?
Yep, now we see it.
Good. Okay, so anyway, Webster, full-time. Love it. So happy to be back in the classroom in August. So online misinformation forever. So this is one kind of a famous example here from 30 years ago about the bat boy. This picture of Elvis apparently was supposed to be taken in St. Louis. Jennifer Aniston in an interview said that she has had like 35 babies so far, if she believes every story that's been written about her being pregnant. And it's so easy, especially if the news is about public figures, to say anything, right? Because they've kind of thrust themselves into the limelight. And so their definition of privacy is much different than ours. And this is one of my favorite memes of all time. And it was sent to me by my aunt. And I wasn't sure if she was being ironic, but I was just excited that she was online. So it's so easy to see things on a screen and think that they're legitimate, especially for someone my age. I just turned 52. When I was growing up, anything on a screen had already been vetted and checked for authenticity. There were editors, right? And not everybody had access to a screen that they could put information on. And obviously now that is all different. And it's been around forever. So this is a famous example. When Hitler got mad at Goebbels, he just deleted him from the photos. So the act of quote unquote photoshopping has been around forever. Now, of course, that's easy. Anybody can do that sort of thing, but also photos get reframed and recycled and repackaged, which I'll show you in a minute. Some of the reasons why this is happening now is that we as individuals can now create information that looks just as legitimate as if it was prepared by CNN or the Times or the Washington Post. And this is all happening while our trust in the traditional or legacy news media is at an all-time low. So there's this vacuum of information that misinformation can really fill. The most important issue, I think, is that we tend to live in social media chambers. So online, we tend to congregate with people who think, feel, believe, and vote the way that we do. And research tells us that if we see a message that affirms what we already feel or believe, we're less likely to check it for authenticity. And then we share it. And since everyone feels the same way we do, it's less likely to be shared. So what we have essentially is this decrease of confidence. And this is just an American example of how our trust in regular newspapers and media sources has dropped. Another thing that's interesting is that our trust in the media has dropped, but we trust our sources more than others. So, for example, here in the United States, maybe someone who is a liberal voter would distrust the media overall, but really trust MSNBC. And someone who's a conservative voter here might distrust the media overall, but really trust their source, which is typically Fox News. And now we have this virus, right, which is global. There's not a lot of information that we know absolutely about it. And so this is a perfect time for misinformation to enter the conversation. And most of the people have seen misinformation about the coronavirus. And here it's at least 57% said they've seen it. I think that that's just the people who know they've seen misinformation. I would bet the number's closer to 100%. This is what's so interesting. I did a Google search term search over coronavirus, and the corona beer virus was actually trending in February and March because people thought it was related to corona beer. And then, of course, there were memes about it. So we're in a perfect storm now of lack of real information, and it's easy to create anything that looks legitimate. So people are more likely to believe what they see, especially when there's no accurate, like we still don't know exactly where the virus came from or how it's transmitted exactly or how to prevent it. You know, we have people here saying, yes, you have to wear a mask all the time, and other people saying masks aren't helpful. So there's this perfect storm of how misinformation can just travel at the speed of light. So when this all started breaking, there were lots of articles about how to avoid the infodemic, is what they were calling it. And I think that's a pretty good term, because consuming false information can, in this case, really affect our health. You know, typically consuming false information before might affect how we vote, or might affect our depression or anxiety or whatever. But now this is a real physical health issue that I think we need to pay attention to. So there's this great group called First Draft News that calls 3 different types of misinformation. So we're trying to get rid of the term fake news because it's been overused. People tend to apply it to any message that they don't like, and it's too broad. So what they're trying to do is share 3 different types. There's misinformation, which is just a mistake. Disinformation, which is when people share things that are fabricated or manipulated intentionally. And then malinformation is when people share disinformation in order to harm someone or harm a movement. So there's a difference between misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, but they're all harmful. So there's four main categories of COVID-19 misinformation: the causes, the cures, how it spread, and confusion about government reaction. So this, I've seen so many memes about how Bill Gates was somehow involved in this. And there's an old TED talk of his that people are taking out of context to try to make it seem like he had some role in this. There's also misinformation about how the virus is spreading, right? So how long does it stay on a surface? It depends on who you ask. Is it transmitted by droplets? It depends on who you ask. World Health Organization says one thing, Centers for Disease Control here in the United States says something else. So there's that vacuum, right? We really don't know who to trust. Now there's some people on Twitter who are trying to do work. Remember, on Twitter, the blue check mark doesn't necessarily mean that what they're sharing is accurate. It just means that Twitter has verified that that person is who they say they are. And so this particular doctor was getting online talking about some of the myths that he was seeing and trying to debunk them. And what's really effective communication about this is that he's short and to the point. Here's some classic examples, and these are from Facebook. Really, you have to be careful about anything that is written in a super long paragraph form like this on the left, okay? Notice how the top says, I think this is worth sharing, from a member of the Stanford Hospital Board. If you want to share something that's false, if you want to create something and have it go viral, say that it is from a friend on the police force, or my sister's coworker, or my husband's cousin, or my friend on the Stanford Hospital Board. All it takes is that little nugget of supposed authenticity, and people will buy it. So if you look at the one on the right, this is from a radio station that shared it. This info is from my friend that works for the CDC. Come on. Like, don't believe anything that starts out with a sentence like that, because it's created specifically that way so that we share it. So here's Dr. Jonas again. He's saying, no, garlic and lemon isn't going to help you. This is just made up. And so there's all of this confusion floating around about what to do. Now, there was this group that took stock video. You can find stock video of anything online, right? B-roll of something, of bananas, and inserted it into an Australian news broadcast, edited it together so that it looked like bananas would prevent COVID-19. And what was so interesting about this is the production values, right? Like, this wasn't made in a TV studio. This could have been made in somebody's basement, and it looked absolutely legitimate. It was created and packaged like a news program. So loads of people believed it, including several of my very educated friends who reached out to me asking, should I be eating bananas? And my response was, go ahead and eat the bananas, but double check the information that you're getting online. And there's also a lot of confusion about the government and official responses. Here in the United States, it was kind of a shit show. Here, this is a great example, and this was actually shared with me by several people. Notice how it says within 48 to 72 hours, the president will evoke what is called the Stafford Act. Okay, so there's that little nugget of something that makes it sound official. And notice too, it says from a credible source at the bottom, please forward to your network. So a lot of times a valid news source is not going to say, please forward, please retweet. They don't have to. They're just sharing information. This was probably the second week of March, and it created quite a bit of panic. And I'm not sure how many people actually looked up the Stafford Act to see if it's legitimate, but notice how it was just inserted in there to make it sound like it was official. And there's lots of chain messages too. Federal government prepared to mobilize the National Guard. Nationwide 1-week quarantine for all citizens. Notice how If they put some things in quotes, people are more likely to believe it, okay? Now, this was a letter that came from the mayor of the city of St. Louis, and really the communication by our elected officials here in the United States was badly done. And I understand that these decisions were difficult to make, and I'm glad I didn't have to make any of them. But notice how long this is. Nobody's going to read this. Nobody's going to read it. Really, the most effective way to communicate is nice and quick. Look at what the New York subway did. Rumors are spreading. We prefer facts. And look, in bold, we will operate regular subway and bus service tomorrow. So they are trying to be in control of the situation, control the narrative, and say, don't believe the rumors. Here we are. And in many cases, a really heavy, long letter is not an effective way to share information. We like bullets. We have short attention spans. We want the information quickly and easily. So one of my favorite conspiracies about the coronavirus is that it was caused by 5G phone antennas. So this tweet caught my attention. Notice how 5G camouflage, ooh. And all of the hashtags are kind of a clue too, right? So I looked at this and I thought, okay, I can see why this is a little fishy. I didn't know that they used chimneys for cell towers. I wonder how common this is. So I did a very simple Google reverse image search, and I'll show you how to do it in just a few minutes. And it turns out that this photo is actually really, really old. This photo is from 2012, okay? So they've been using cell towers in camouflaged ways for years. So I kind of went into a deep dive to look at all the different ways that cell signals are amplified. Like here's a palm tree, pine tree, flag poles. Even some churches have them modeled to look just like the bricks. Okay, so disguising cell tower signals is not a new thing. But if you're already worried that 5G causes COVID-19, you're going to see that picture. You won't bother to check to see that it's from 2012, and you will share it with your network. And especially if you're using all those hashtags, people who are also interested in that are looking for those hashtags. So it's a way to get that message out. Oh, also you can do them with chimneys. Like, I was fascinated by this just because I started looking up this tweet with the picture of the chimney. So yes, you can put antennas in a chimney. It's not new. It's not a conspiracy. It's been done for years and years. So look at all of the different official government responses. So this one from France. Notice the one in the middle, just in from a friend on Boris's team. There's that hook, right? It could be completely made up, but if you say it's from somebody who knows somebody, people are more likely to believe it. Such a vacuum of information. We stuff because we didn't have information. Now, something that went viral here in the US was the hashtag Film Your Hospital. This was started by a group of people who insisted that the virus was a scam and that it was just created by the media to create hysteria. So what they were doing is going around and filming empty hospital parking lots. Didn't notice or bother to mention is that, of course, the parking lots were empty in March and April because we weren't allowed to go. Like, all of the elective procedures were canceled. No one was allowed to visit. So of course, all of the parking lots were empty. But remember, if you're a part of this crowd that thinks this was all a conspiracy, you're going to buy into this and you're going to share it. If you notice, this had 22,000 retweets and 34,000 likes when I took the screenshot of it. In my YouTube playlist, I did a couple debunkers of the Film Your Hospital clips because they're looking so badly to prove a point that was unnecessary. So one of the tricks when we're consuming information, especially during breaking news, is that we have to remember how our brains work. Our brains process images 40,000 times faster than we process words. And a really effective communicator knows this. So here's an anti-vaccine meme that is a very compelling image, a very compelling image. Here is the Australian government guide to vaccinations. Which one's easier to consume, right? It's the one on the left, because it is an image and it's easy to consume. And really our brains think that anything written in mean font is accurate. So as you know, we're teaching communicators, right? We have to teach communicators to be thorough but simple at the same time. Otherwise people aren't going to pay attention. And it's much easier to share a visually simple message. And look, this was about the 5G conspiracy again. Truth always hides in plain sight. Notice how 5G looks like the virus. Like, come on. Now, this is full disclosure. I fell for this hook, line, and sinker. I fell for this one. This guy, Peter, tweets out a picture. The state emergency order calls for fines up to $1,000 for ignoring social distancing. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So there's $11,000 worth of fines in this photo. And I tweeted it out because I'm really not a fan of government overall. I tweeted out the irony that here the government is saying $1,000 fine if you don't social distance, and yet they're all standing together, right? Well, I fell for it because I tend to believe the worst of the government. But it was an old photo. Here's now, and look at this is a tweet from a verified account, right? So he fell for it too. Really, what this was a photo from last January. So it's very easy to take a photo and reuse it. And one of the reasons that this happened is that the television news station actually used the old clip. They used B-roll of the governor signing a bill from January of last year without connecting what they were actually talking about and realizing the problematic. So there's a couple things that we need to be aware of, and these are from First Draft, and I think they're really good. The familiarity backfire effect. In many cases, if we continue to share these debunks in order to debunk them, if we continue to share the false information, in many cases, people will double down and even believe them more because we're bringing it up. The overkill backfire effect is that the easier the information is to process, the more likely it is to be accepted. So think about that anti-vaccination meme, right? That is really easy to process. So people are more likely to believe that than to read the 40-page booklet from the government of Australia. And this is pretty common, but First Draft calls it the worldview backfire effect, that we process in biased ways. And I think that that's one of the first steps to really being news literate and media literate, is to acknowledge the biases that we bring to the experience, because we're human, we all have them, right? And so if a message affirms what we already feel, we are less likely to check it for authenticity. And in many cases, we will double down on that. I kind of like to think of it, I'm a Star Wars fan, and I kind of like to think of it as putting the shields up. If I have my shields up, nothing can get through. And I think a lot of people consume news, especially during breaking news, with their shields up, that not everything, they're not going to let anything through, just the messages that they like. So the biggest problem, I think, is that it's just too easy to create and spread misinformation. So if you can bear with me, can you guys still see my screen? Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go to Google. I'm going to pick, let's just do, I'm going to do an image search, police brutality. Okay, so I copy the image. Okay, now I'm going to go to Twitter. How long did that take me to do? 10 seconds? And if I put in the appropriate hashtags here, this would go. Because anyone following the hashtags, right, are looking for things like this. And there's no repercussions, right? I mean, it's a free-for-all. So I could, and remember, every email account can have up to 6 Twitter accounts. So I could have my regular Julie Smith Twitter account and then 5 scam accounts where I just generate fake stuff. And people do that. And I've had people ask me before, like, why do people do this, Julie? Like, hang on, I got to get out of Twitter and make sure I don't accidentally send this out. You know, why do people do this? And I don't know. There's a wide range. I think in some cases, like if you look at the role that Macedonia played in our 2016 presidential election, a lot of those kids were creating false information to generate clicks so that they could get money from Google AdSense, right? So there's a monetary motivation in some cases. I think some people do it for sport to see if they can trick people from the other side, right? And I think some people, what was the Batman movie? Some people just like to watch the world burn. I think some people just like to stir things up. And because they have access to the same platforms as everyone else, we have to be extra vigilant. So as you're probably aware, there's quite a bit of racial unrest happening in the United States these days. And this appeared on my neighborhood Facebook page. This was last week. And I live in the South County area of St. Louis. So notice how it says, this is a heads up from a pretty reliable source. How do we know? Update, intel from police friend. South County Mall is going to have riots tonight. Everyone stay inside. South County Mall, like what? There'd be 2 people in there, you know, like, and so I debunked this on the neighborhood Facebook page and demonstrated how easy it is to create a text that looks like something else. I really enjoyed all of the tweets about the escaped animals last week. Reports of a tiger on the loose near the Oakland Zoo. If you see it, call 911. Then about 10 minutes later, tigers are all accounted for. But this was my favorite response. That's exactly what a tiger would say. Please confirm you are not a tiger. I love it. I love it. But here's an example. There's a hippo walking the streets of Chicago right now. This is a compelling photo. It's weird. So it's more likely that it will probably be shared. But if you do a Google reverse image search of this photo, it actually escaped from the circus in 2016. You can see it's the exact same photo. So it's so easy to get online, find a photo, and just repackage it. Now, this is especially important during breaking news. So May 20th, there was a shooting in Glendale, Arizona. And I saw that it was trending. And so I got online and I saw this tweet from someone named Barnabas. Breaking news, second Arizona shooter has been identified as Rob Kinnison. So what I did right then is I debunked it. I filmed the debunking. I just did a Google reverse image search. This guy is named Rob Kinnison, but when I Googled him, it turns out that every single shooting since 2014, someone has blamed this guy. And then it goes viral. So what was interesting about this debunk is because I used the Glendale hashtag, it got 1,000 views before I went to bed that night. And the news stations were picking it up because they wanted people to see how to do this in real time. Because, you know, we hate misinformation as educators, but the traditional news people, the people who have had journalistic training, they hate it more than we do because it's making them look like they're on the same level as this guy Barnabas. It was an account from Nigeria. He had 40 followers. This is one of the videos that I wanted to show you. So I'm going to, I will send the link to the WebEx chat so everyone can take a look at how easy it is to debunk this type of thing. So what do we do? That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's hard because I advocate for constant skepticism, but you don't want to be cynical either, right? So there's this dance. I kind of do this dance around the line between skepticism and cynicism. I follow John Green. He says the quality of our information directly shapes the quality of our decisions. And not just about voting, but whether or not to wear a mask, whether or not it's safe to go outside. So we have to make sure that the quality of information that we are consuming is the highest possible. So what do? Stop to think, check your sources, and use these tools. Now, all the tools that I'm going to go through in the next couple of minutes, I actually have on a bit.ly that I'm going to share with you, so you have links to everything. The number one thing to do is to check your feelings. If you consume a message and it gives you a really strong emotional response, whether it's anger or fear or excitement, if you're having a really strong emotional response, that is your first clue that you need to stop, take a breath, and check it for authenticity. That's your first step. You also need something called the lateral reading. And what that means, for example, this went viral during the 2016 election here, and it's old now, but it's one of my favorite examples. It says, did you know Pennsylvania now has online voting? It's critical that we defeat Donald Trump. That's why we fought for and won the battle for online voting. To vote online, simply post Hillary with the hashtag presidential election. Okay. This is really, really well done. It looks professional. It looks professional. Hillary did not win Pennsylvania, and I imagine that some people fell for this. Voting, you know, you got to put on shoes and leave the house and go stand in line. So it would take 3 or 4 seconds for someone to do lateral reading here and see, do we really have online voting? Right? Lateral reading is just checking other sources. For example, this was posted on Queen Elizabeth tests positive for coronavirus. Okay. If that was really true, everybody would have been talking about it, not some rando on Twitter. Okay, so lateral reading is checking other sources. If only one person is talking about it, that's your clue that it's probably not real. You also want to recognize standard journalism practices. Recognize that some people have had enormous, lengthy training on how to be a journalist, but the rest of us are posting stuff all the time, even though we may not have had that training. So TikTok is the hot spot now for false information. So we want to be really careful. This was a TikTok that appeared in St. Louis, and it says they're replacing lights in some areas with ones that have a clear casing that drops below so that it can spy on people. Okay. And if you look at the hashtags, coronavirus check, 5G, hashtag wake up. Right? Well, I did some diving and it looks like, yeah, the street lights were replaced, but they were replaced so they could show different colors based on the holiday or the sports team playing at the time. Okay. So the St. Louis Post-Dispatch hires journalists. TikTok has teenagers in yoga pants. Okay. So there's some practical tools. The most useful practical tool is Google reverse image search. Everybody should know how to do this. It takes just a couple of seconds. If you're a Chrome user, what you do is hover the cursor over an image, right click it, and then you're going to get a drop-down menu that will say search Google for this image. What that does is it shows you every single website that is using the exact same image. So if you see a photo that is really, really compelling, well, double check and make sure that it's new for number one, and see if it hasn't been recycled, repackaged, or repurposed from a previous time. It's very, very easy to do. There's also Chrome extensions called TinEye, which does the exact same thing. Okay. Botometer is a really interesting project from the University of Indiana. What you do here is you enter in the screen name of a Twitter account, and it will tell you if that person is a bot. To report that I am only 0.2 bot. But typically, like when you get a new Twitter follower, you want to make sure that it's not a brand new account. If it's someone's name with like 7 or 8 numbers after the name, that's usually a clue. Bot account. Also, the grammar is a check. And if they're not using correct grammar, that's also a red flag. But do the botometer and double check to make sure that your new followers are actual people. Snopes, of course, is a classic. They get about 300,000 hits a day. A lot of people say that Snopes is biased, and I always say, if it's created by a human, of course it's biased, right? So you want to do lateral reading of Snopes too, and check other sites like Emergent. Emergent is very similar to, but it's faster. So if something goes viral this morning, Emergent will have it up this afternoon. Now, Trends Map is pretty interesting. This is a Trends Map photo of Geneva that I did yesterday. So apparently the Vogue challenge was very big in Europe yesterday. So what Trends Map is you go to anywhere in the world and it will tell you what terms are trending in that geographic area that day. So for example, if you see that something might be happening in Geneva, but you go to Trends Map and no one is talking about it, then that's probably your clue that it's not actually happening. Whois is a really interesting site. And remember, I'm going to share links to all of these for you, so don't worry. When you plug in a URL on Whois, it will tell you who owns the site. So what was really interesting last semester, I had my students do this in media literacy class, and what they noticed that is in many cases, a really far right-wing website and a really far left-wing website were owned by the same company. So it's all about the money, right? Follow the money. Hoaxslayer is an interesting site for truth seekers because it categorizes the fakes. So there's fake memes, fake email links. They have it categorized so it's almost easier to do a search, whereas Snopes does it chronologically. So like whatever's trending this week will be the first story that shows up on Snopes. Videos on social media platforms are a tougher nut to crack. A lot of times people will share YouTube links or copy YouTube links and then re-upload them. So Amnesty International did a really cool site. It's called the YouTube Data Viewer. And if you plug in a YouTube URL into the YouTube Data Viewer, it will give you the exact date that a clip was uploaded so that you can find out if it's actually referring to the story that it's supposed to be referring to. Also, if you really want to do some dissecting of YouTube videos, this is a site where you can watch frame by frame and in slow motion to see if it has been doctored. So if you're familiar with that clip, like there's a kind of a famous clip about this big hawk that comes and like lifts up a toddler. If you do that and watch frame by frame, you actually see where the video has been edited. So these are fun tools to give students to have them kind of go off on their own detective journeys, right? To see what's real and what's not. PageRank Checker is another good source because what it does is it tells you, like say, for example, you see something kind of fishy on a website, you plug it into the PageRank Checker and it will tell you where it fits on a Google search results page. So if it's a site that sits way at the bottom, that's your clue that it's probably a new site and that it hasn't been linked to anything recently. But if it's higher up, it probably means that the site has a bit more credibility. First Draft News, which I referenced earlier, has excellent sources at their website for teachers, journalists, and students. And I'm also a huge fan of the News Literacy Project. They have a wonderful program called Checkology for classrooms, but they also have loads of tools of ways to identify online misinformation. And they have fantastic free webinars. So really what we have to do is activate our internal BS detectors and make sure that we recognize all of the things that are happening right now that make online misinformation so prevalent and what to do about it. So this is my bit.ly. It's bit.ly fake tools, and it will take you, you know what, let me take you there right now. I'll just take you there right now. So it's a Google Doc, and then I have links for you for all of those sources that I listed. And then I also have a link to the playlist of my debunking videos so that you can kind of get an idea of how I debunk something when I find something online and how quickly it can be done, usually between 1 and 2 minutes. So that is the information that I have for you all. Tell me what I should do now. Hang on. Francesco, what do I do?
I'm here.
Okay.
I have questions for you, but I hope you have questions as well. So I will not be the first one starting because I don't want to monopolize. So thank you for the presentation. So questions from anyone?
Yeah, I hope that some of this information is useful.
Anyone?
I can start. It's Juliana.
I was waiting for
Hey, we almost have the same name, so go start. Julie, thank you so much for your talk. It was great. So Twitter is a big hero right now. You know, after what they did.
I love
Right.
Twitter.
Yeah, so I was wondering whether anybody else is going to follow suit. I mean, you mentioned that when we were all growing up, you know, the vetting process was more of a thing. Authentication used to be more serious. So is there any sign that other social media sites follow suit? Twitter's footsteps?
I doubt it, unless regulators over here get involved, which I think might be the next step, potentially after the next election. But we shall see, right? What's interesting is that you know, we have the First Amendment protection here in the United States, and a lot of people complain about that. And what they don't realize is that the First Amendment exists to keep us out of jail for criticizing the government. It doesn't mean that we can criticize the government on a platform owned by someone else without any repercussions. So the platforms are privately owned, profit-based. So whatever will keep them making money is what they will do. I don't see Facebook buckling. I don't see YouTube buckling. And really, in their defense, because of the sheer volume of content, I don't know how they can check everything. You know, I think it's something like 380 hours of YouTube content is uploaded every minute. So the volume makes it so difficult. And with Facebook especially, they have algorithms, but they also have humans. And there's been articles about how the fact checkers at Facebook are having to go through post-traumatic stress therapy because of all the terrible stuff they're seeing. Like, it's awful. It's awful. So I would love to see more action from those huge platforms, but I think the volume makes it difficult. And I think the fact that they're profit-based makes it difficult too. You know, I don't think that Mark Zuckerberg intended to create a news organization, but that's essentially what it has become. And so there are some screams for it to be regulated, but time will tell. Time will tell. Really, I think the best defense is media literacy instruction. You know, we can't trust the platforms to do it for us. We really, the best tool is really in between our ears. I know that's not the answer you wanted, but it's our job. It's our job.
I just want to blame someone, you know, like you're doing better. Be accountable. Come on.
Yeah, sadly, the onus is on us, I'm afraid.
Other questions? Yes, Caroline. Hi.
Caroline, hello, my dear.
Hello, Julie. Oh, it was really fascinating talk. I mean, you know, I used to teach critical thinking, so this issue is very near and dear to my heart because I still do investigation, and I think we've got a great future in, you know, investigation for Facebook and these big platforms. But I was just wondering what you were saying about no consequences for people who are putting up what you're calling, you know, malinformation, misinformation. There's no consequences at all for people, because is it not sort of libelous or defamatory?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to make sure that in order to pursue a defamation or libel case, you have to make sure that the platform will cough up that account's ISP, and they don't always do that. Also, if you're a public figure, you have to prove malice, and that's also difficult to do. And again, with the volume, it's almost, I think some people feel like it's almost better to let sleeping dogs lie rather than stir things up. And in many cases, I think people can say that opinions are legal. And there's an interesting, I don't know if Yelp is big in Europe, but Yelp is like a restaurant rating app here. And Yelp has gotten into some trouble because people get on there and leave really bad reviews for restaurants that are false. And the restaurant has a way to say, look, you are affecting my business with this false information, and Yelp will not give up the anonymous users. So I think that we have a lot of things stacked against the effectiveness of a libel or defamation suit when it comes to this stuff.
No, it's interesting because it's a very fine line between having an opinion and, you know, legitimately out there, even though it might be, right. You know, for example, at my kids' school, I just found out somebody just got expelled for doing an anti-Floyd video, and you know, he got fired. You know, there's this been a whole movement against Floyd, and yeah, but when you're creating the content maliciously, I think it's I would hope that the legislators could fill in the hole. But anyway, thank you for a brilliant talk, and I'll let somebody else ask the next question. Well
it's
done.
lovely to see. It's lovely to see you. I miss you.
I have Glenn who raised a hand, if I'm not wrong.
Hi, Glenn.
I don't know. Glenn, do you have a question or?
Maybe he's just saying hi.
Okay, other questions or comments? Jenny, you want to say something?
Sorry, I didn't have a question. Sorry.
Okay. No problem. Jenny, you wanted to say something. I saw you unmuted and.
I thought Glenn was going to go first.
No, it was an error. Apparently.
Okay. So here's a question. So I'm an elementary music teacher, and there's a website that I listen to a lot, and it comes out of South America, and it's spiritual, and to get their messages out, they have like a kind of a drone voice, and it's very off-putting. It just sort of doesn't sit well, because I know that they are trying to get messages out, and so I'm, you know, like, how do I check the authenticity or the, you know, to go back and I guess what I'm saying is there's like a woman that supposedly like 27 years ago, she's been receiving messages. So, and it comes in the form of the Spanish, you know, she's Hispanic. So the language barrier. So to get it out, they use this kind of, it sounds like a robotic, you know, thing.
Like a translator or something.
Yes. And so, you know, it just doesn't sound great. But I was wondering, like, how do you go about, you know, checking? I guess I need to look at some of your things that you've given and go back, you know, to
well, I would start with the website to see who's paying for the website. I would Google any name affiliated with the website and see what their backgrounds are, see if they're legitimate. I would check all the social media platforms that website uses. I'm assuming they're trying to promote themselves in some way. Because if you have questions about it, I bet other people do too. And those questions might have already been asked online somewhere. So I would start with a Google search and a Bing search. Remember, Google's not gospel. Google results are very easily manipulated. So you want to use as many different search engines as possible. But I think that might be kind of a fun little assignment.
Yes,
figure that out, you know?
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I do for fun. It's really sad.
Awesome.
Yeah. Start and Google every single name that you can find associated with that website.
And before you leave, can you also put up that bit.ly site?
I just did on the chat.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I'll look at that. Thank you.
Yeah. You bet.
Other questions? I have a comment.
Oh no.
But again, is there anyone else before me or? Okay, so I'm going to be selfish and answer this question. Because actually what struck me is thinking also about the quality of journalism. I mean, we need to expand the field and think more broadly about sources of information. So one of the things that I started thinking about during the COVID-19 outbreak in Italy is the use of social media in general, and how it was possible that some people in general, rely more on social media than newspapers online. So this is one of the questions, and of course it goes to the point that actually asked to myself: is the newspaper online still a valid source?
Yes. Mainly because their reporters and writers have gone through that journalism training.
But I can tell you that, for instance, in Italy, a journalist is paid 15 euros per piece. Therefore, they need to produce. I mean, I'm not talking about, the majority of journalists are not hired. So when you have to produce a piece for 15 euros, most of the cases you don't even check your information. Or I'll give you an example. There was,
Okay.
what was the name? Martinier, the guy who actually discovered the HIV virus. And he was interviewed in France, and that interview went viral, saying that the virus was, he said that it was probably manipulated for several reasons. I'm not arguing about if it's true or not.
Right.
And of course, then on the newspapers, this became kind of viral, up to the point that the journalist said, why do we have to trust this old guy who, yes, he got the Nobel Prize, but now he's getting old. How do we trust him? Without referencing anything in particular. So me reading the article, I was thinking, why should I trust you, writer, telling me that I should not trust the other guy? So, how can I trust information on newspaper? What is the reliable information at this point?
What is reliable information? Yeah, that's $1 million question, isn't it? I want to back up because you asked if newspapers were still trustworthy, and my answer was yes. I want to change that to more trustworthy than your neighbor on Facebook. Okay.
I take that.
Yeah. And what I noticed too with my students, and maybe you all notice also, they cannot tell the difference between an article and an editorial. That editorials, are in a special part of the newspaper, and the articles are different. I think that they're so used to consuming all editorialized content online that they don't recognize true, quote unquote, journalism. I also, like when the COVID-19 stuff started to fly around, people were asking me where to go for information. And one of the pieces of advice I gave was go to a website that is not monetized. Go to a website that does not sell advertisements.
The other point I wanted to make is that, at least in Italy, most of the newspapers are owned by money.
Sure.
So when you're writing something, you have to write something, but
well, and that's the thing too, to recognize that yes, people, some of the sources might have journalism training, but they still work for institutions that are economically driven. So I think, and a lot of media literacy people don't push the whole economic angle of it. And I think that's the very beginning of it all, that they're not in public service. And if you can find a source that officially is in quote unquote public service, I tend to give that source more credibility because they have nothing to gain by me clicking on their story. And I think that's an important distinction, is information sources that are profit-based and those that aren't. Because I think it's so important that we understand the role we play in the economic structure of it all.
Well, I'll give you an example, and maybe this is interesting for all the others here. I was talking to my neighbor here who has 2 houses in Provence, in the southern part of France. And he told me, yeah, I usually rent these houses. And during the COVID-19 outbreak, I didn't manage to rent them, of course, during the spring. So the spring has been a disaster. But now, for the summer, I have all them, it's everything full. So they are booked. People are going on holidays in Provence. And I have a friend,
sounds lovely.
I have a friend who owns an agriturismo in Italy, who's empty, which is empty, and it's going to be empty for the whole summer. So my question today was talking with my wife and said, why do we have this difference? And it's not only her. Huh? People are not going on holidays in Italy, but they're going on holidays in the southern part of France. Is there any impact of media on it? And in my opinion, there is a way in which I follow Italian newspapers from the beginning until now, and also the French newspapers. And I have to say that the way they communicated about the outbreak was different. Italian newspapers really wanted people to subscribe for the newspaper, therefore the scandal and attracting the attention, which is based on people are dying, pay attention, I have the best news, follow me. But now this is detrimental. This is actually becoming
there's an economic result to all of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you asked if the media influence people's perceptions, right? Absolutely. And that's what we're seeing here in the United States, for example. If you are an American who's never had a conversation with a person who's not white, and you're white, you depend, for better or for worse, you depend on the media to teach you about people you've never met. We depend on, if we've never been to Italy, we depend on the news media to teach us about Italy, and the media in general to teach us about Italy. So Italy was absolutely the #1 story over here for a long, long time, regardless of what was happening in other countries. And I don't know why that is, but absolutely there's an influence. Remember, the average person now is consuming 11 hours a day of electronic mass media. You can't say that that doesn't influence us one way or the other. We are constantly told that everybody in Italy is sick and dying.
I give you the last example.
And we're told nothing, and we're told nothing about France. I'm going to go to France instead of Italy, right?
I can tell you that, for instance, in Italy, they spread the voice that Greece is not accepting Italian tourists. But this is not true. After the 15th of June, Italians will be accepted as European in Greece. And this is a fact. But if you don't check this information, all my friends told me, oh, but we cannot go on holidays in Greece, so we're not going because this is the news. And this is
because they're not
social media.
They're not doing lateral reading, right? Yeah. And the thing is that, like, we can sit here and say, yeah, lateral reading is the answer. Well, that takes time. It takes time and effort, and sadly, that's what it's going to take. I mean, the responsibility is ours to maneuver through this crazy landscape.
Okay, do we have other comments or questions before we end our amazing session, I have to say?
I just wanted to share with Julie something I read it's called Brian Martin at Wollongong University. And it's interesting for everybody in the media department, you too, Francesca. Mm-hmm. It's called Unofficial Channels, and he's got chapters on like whistleblowing and disinformation. But there was a chat. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And there's a chapter on Wikipedia, which was absolutely fascinating, because he himself was the object of a disinformation campaign. And so he went in to research how the disinformation came about, and he got the whole back of Wikipedia and how they do their editing and how Wikipedia operates. And he really peeled back the gender bias in there and who is doing the editing behind Wikipedia. It was fascinating, and I'll send it to you. It's just been published. You can buy the hard book, but he makes all of his material available online for free. So if you just go to Unofficial Channels, it's and his writing's great. But what goes on at Wikipedia is a fascinating example of, you know, of misinformation, disinformation, and
well, it's probably very similar to what happens on Reddit, right?
I imagine. I mean, I'm nowhere much of an expert as you, but for me, I was just reading it today and I thought it's amazing. But thank you so much, Julie. It was just fabulous to see you on such good form and a great lecture. So thank you, thank you.
Thank you. I hope that this information has been helpful and that you guys have learned about some tools that maybe you didn't know about before.
Definitely. Jenny, you want to add something before?
I was just saying thank you. That was awesome.
Okay. Before we finish up, I want to say that the next event will be on June 25th, and it will be called Drive Your Digital Marketing Strategy by Marco Barber and Nicolas Rohrbasser. And it will be about digital marketing and communications and the impact on business strategies. So we will meet again on 25th. Thank you very much for being here with us. And I'm going to stop here the recording.